When I heard I was becoming a dad, first time, being married to my wife for 45 years, and when she was going to give birth to our first child, I made a list of what I wanted to be as a dad to that child. And we ended up having 3. And at the top of my list, and I'm sure it's at the top of yours, I want my children to follow Jesus all the days of their life. I think that is what you want as a dad, if you're a Christian. In fact, that's what you want as a mom, too, if you're a Christian. Or even as an aunt or a godfather, we want the children who have such incredible potential to make a success of their life, to have God on their side and peace with God. That's our heart. That is where our heart. But I learned something about passing on our faith. And that is, the children have a horrible way of copying everything I do in spite of everything that I do to try to teach them good manners. Kids copy me. And I learned that the only way to have this Christian child would be for me to be the example. So my topic today is that. It's about passing on a faith that works. That works. I have a friend called Dr. David Overholt. He teaches at Tyndale University. He also pastors a church, and he and I have done conferences speaking across the country. And he tells a story of his church where there was a guy on drugs and messed up, near overdose, all sorts of issues, a tough kid. And somebody witnessed to him and told him about Jesus, and he ended up becoming a follower of Jesus, started attending church regularly, and his life began to change. And then one day, a young person, a girl, was killed in a car accident in Hamilton, where they live, in Hamilton. And so they did a funeral at the church. And this guy, this former drug guy, was there, and he watched as the family of the church gathered around the couple that had lost their daughter. And they prayed, and they helped, and they gave them food, and they were looking after them. And this guy looked and saw them all doing that, and he said, yes, 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 yes! I chose the right religion. And the pastor said, what do you mean you chose the right religion? Yes, I chose the right religion. Look, look, look. It works. You know, the young people today, everywhere, they're not interested in doctrine and theology. They want to know if what you have works. They should be interested in doctrine and theology, but the fact is, does it work? Is it making a difference in my life? And can they see the difference that it's making in my life? There was a lady who invited the pastor over for dinner, and they had the pastor over with a family there, and the lady said to the son, "Son, I'd like you to lead in prayer at the dinner table." And the little boy said, you know the prayer mom gives always? So the little boy prays, "Lord, why did I invite these boring people for dinner tonight?" What makes that even remotely funny is that people, kids especially, don't do what we say. They copy what we do. It's scary, isn't it? Scary. So let's take a moment then to look at the things that we learn from this passage in James. First, we learn that there is, in fact, we're going to look at 3 kinds of faith. James talks to us in the Bible from useless faith. It's faith, but it's not really faith, and no works, no difference in the life. And look what James says. He says, "What good is it, brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds?" No deeds. What good is it if we say we're followers of Jesus, but you couldn't tell that I'm a follower of Jesus, and the children wouldn't tell? There's a story of a Catholic school, and in the Catholic school, they had a tough lunch lady who was a nun. And as the kids were lining up, they had apples and all the food at the cafeteria to help themselves. And as they came, the lady said to the children, "There's only one apple. Only one apple. God is watching. God is watching, only one apple." And one kid at the other end puts a sign with the cookies. "Take as many cookies as you like, because God is watching the apples." And you know, God is watching how I live my Christian life, but so are my children, and so are the people I work with, and so are my friends. So what good is it, brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? We're not making a difference. It isn't making a difference in my life. Look what else he says. Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace and keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? And Jesus told a powerful story about the Good Samaritan. And the story, which is a parable, is about this guy who is an immigrant, the Samaritan, disliked because he was a different race, different color skin, etc. But Jesus makes this guy the hero of the story. And he's talking to Jews, and along comes this Samaritan, that the Jews unfortunately hated, racial prejudice, so the story is, he sees this man that's been robbed and beaten, and he's there on the ground. And Jesus purposely says, a Levite came past. A Levite was a guy that goes to church all the time. And when the Levite saw the guy all broken and in need, like that verse, he crossed and went on the other side and didn't help at all. And then along came a priest, the pastor. And the pastor saw the guy in need, but he crossed on the other side. He was either going to church or coming from church, and just went. But along came this guy, the hero, the immigrant, and when he saw the need, he did what he could, and he helped. And then Jesus said, which one loved? Right? And so we see that our Christian faith has to make a difference in how I live my life. Otherwise, it's not really faith at all. They claim to know God, but by their actions they deny him. In the same way, faith by itself is if not accompanied by actions, is dead. Faith that it doesn't change my life isn't faith at all. It's dead. I just find this, I don't know how you do, but I find this story incredibly challenging. A guy called Warren Whizby, one of my mentors, said this: any declaration of faith that does not result in a changed life and good works is a false declaration. And I find that challenging too. Look what else James says. You foolish person, you foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? There's the word, useless. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Is dead. I love the story of a fellow called John. Happened many, many years ago, and John was an alcoholic, a drunk. He beat his wife all the time. He gambled the money. He was a horrible man. The poor wife put up with the beatings and the poverty because the guy always squandered any money with his alcoholism, and cursed and swore. A really horrible guy. Everyone stayed clear of John. But one day a preacher came, and the preacher was a good speaker. And so he was also a real he-man. He was a real guy, and he lived out his faith in the community, and people knew that he was a real article. And so this drunk John would come in at the back and just listen to the sermon and then leave. And every time he left, he'd say, good sermon. But he'd go back to alcohol. He'd go back to beating his wife, to doing gambling and all those things. But one day, the preacher talked about how faith starts with knowing Jesus Christ as your Savior. You're not saved by works. You're saved by grace. But once you're saved, it should change your life. And so this guy was sitting at the back, and the preacher said, if you're here and you need Jesus, come forward. And this particular day, for some reason, maybe John wasn't quite as drunk today, and he got up and he came forward, and the preacher prayed with him, and he repented of his sins and the life he'd lived, asked God to come into his life, and promised to follow God and Jesus for the rest of his life. As he walked back to his seat, people in the pew said, it's not going to work. He's not going to be any difference. But you know what happened? Jesus did take hold of John, and John changed in that moment. That's why I love the gospel. God takes broken people like me and like you, people who often mess up, and he gives us hope in a world that has no hope, because Jesus died on the cross for my sins and yours. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. God wants to give us hope and a new beginning. And that's what happened to John. And he ended up repenting for his wife and becoming a model father and a model husband, and he ended up getting a job and gave up gambling, gave up alcohol, and he started helping people in the community. He was good at woodwork, fixing doors and windows for people for free. And then when he died many years later, the whole town showed up to honor John. What had happened? He had changed. And you could see that he changed by the way he lived his life. He was a follower of Jesus because people could see how he lived his life. Winston Churchill, the great Prime Minister of England, he said, I never believe what people say. I look for how they live. He said, I look for how they live. Because behavior doesn't lie. Behavior doesn't lie. Challenging. So we see then that we have the first kind of faith, which is really not faith at all, because it makes no difference in a life. But that takes us to the faith, absent faith. This is where people do good works, but they don't have faith. They're just good people doing good things. Look what James says. But someone will say, you have faith. I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. My family are not Christians. All my extended family, obviously my family is, but my parents' families and uncles and all that, they're not believers. One of my relatives, when I went to the house, they live in the United States, when I pulled into the driveway, they had a van, their van parked there, and it had one of these symbols you might have seen of Darwin as a big, about to eat the Christian fish symbol. They don't like Christians at all. But they're good people. They're moral people. They're hardworking people. They volunteer, and they volunteer in not Christian things, but they volunteer in sports events to help the school. They volunteer at a secondhand store for poor people, at soup kitchens. These people are really excellent people. They are better than many Christians. But they don't have faith. And they don't have peace with God. Well, one of my relatives died at nearly 90. Her last words were, oh, well, that's life. And she died. No hope. No hope in Jesus Christ. So obviously, we don't want to do good works without Jesus. So that takes us to what I really want to talk about, which is genuine faith. And James reminds us that if we're going to pass on a faith, the faith has to be the real deal. And obviously that's what you want and that's what I want. Okay? Faith that works. Look what James says. Was not your father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, faith and action working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And there was a sacrifice involved. Offering his son on the altar was scary. It was effort. He had to choose to do it. And following God is a sacrifice. Thinking of your wife instead of yourself all the time, or making sure you spend time with the children so they don't have an absentee dad or mother. In other words, there's something involved, some action involved. And it goes on about Abraham. And the scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Credited is when you're broken. It's a accounting term or legal term. It's when you're bankrupt, and God and his grace sees that you mean business with him, and he credits you with righteousness. You don't deserve it, but it's called grace. And you are in right standing with God. And you could see that by the way that Abraham lived his life. And it says, and he called God God's friend. I want to be God's friend. I want my children to be God's friend, to have God as their friend. You see that a person is considered righteous, but what they do are not by faith alone. We're righteous by what we do and not by faith alone. Wow. I think that that's significant. I love the story of a true story of a pastor that gets onto the bus, the regular bus. And as he gets onto the bus, he pays for it. And the bus driver, instead of giving him change for $5, gives him change like if he gave him $20. So the pastor who's poor gets to the back of the bus and sees a $10 bill. He gave him $5. He's got $10, $15. He's got all this extra money. And he's thinking, is this the devil tempting me, or is this God providing? And he thought about it the whole ride. And then just as he's going to get off at his stop, the pastor goes up to the bus driver and says, you gave me too much change. Here is all the extra change you gave me. And the bus driver said, I know who you are. You're the pastor of my wife's church. I did that on purpose to see if you were the real deal. You're going to see me in church on Sunday. People are looking for us when we make a difference, when we do what's right. Isn't that cool? When we do, there's also the reality of sometimes we as Christians don't do anything. There's this story told of an old lady, sweet old lady who dies, and they want to write an obituary, and the only person in the newspaper that can write it is a sports writer. He's never written an obituary about sports. But they ask, would you go do it? So this is what he writes. A lady was called Nancy Jones. And he wrote this. Here lie the bones of Nancy Jones. For her life held no terrors. She lived a no-maid. She died a no-maid. No runs, no hits, no errors. And it's sad if we live our life and don't make a difference in anyone's life. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So let's just take a moment to look at the next slide, which is so what have we seen here this morning about passing on our faith? What have we seen that works? Well, we've seen a bunch of things, but probably the most important is that my example as a dad or as a mom, frankly, is what's going to most influence my child to become a follower of Jesus. None of us are perfect. We make mistakes, and we apologize to our children when we blow it, right? They know that we're not perfect. I certainly am not. But we do that, passing on our faith. I have a friend called Luis Palau, Dr. Luis Palau, who's an evangelist, preaches all over the world. Poor man got cancer, terminal cancer right now. But Luis Palau told me, I had him come and speak at my churches a number of times over the years, and I preached with him in Europe for some crusades that he did. And he said to me, one of the things that most influenced my life was my dad. His father became a Christian later in life, very successful businessman. And one night, Luis said, I got out of bed because I needed to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And as I went through the dark house to go to the bathroom, I saw a form in the living room, and I got scared. And I looked again, and it was my dad in the dark, kneeling on the sofa with a poncho. We're from South America. We wear ponchos. With a poncho over him. And he was praying. And I heard my dad praying for me. And he said, that impacted me. You see, the father didn't know the son was watching, but they are. Isn't that cool? what a difference we can make by being that example, as again, not the perfect example. Probably the best way to explain the whole message from James is in this illustration. You know, a tree. When you see a tree that's got beautiful leaves and fruit, you know that underneath the ground where you can't see, there are roots that go deep and are getting the water and the nutrients, right? So when we see good works, love and kindness and action, we know that their faith is obviously real and strong, like roots. If you see a tree that's dead, you know that it's not producing anything because the roots are dead too. There are no roots. And I want to be a Christian who produces fruit, and I know you do too. In the book of Psalms it says this, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Lead me. God, I want to honor you. I want to be the best dad I can be. I want to be the best aunt I can be. I want to be the best mother I can be. I want to be the best uncle I can be. I want to be the best teacher I can be. I want to shine for Jesus. That's what I want to do. God, help me to change the things that I need to change to make this difference. A man called Harry Moore. Harry Moore was the governor of New Jersey. He was a governor. And so he was the governor more times than any other politician. And then he stopped being governor and he became a senator. And then he went back and they voted him back as governor again for New Jersey. A powerful speaker, a very successful man. But he did not grow up in a special home. His father died at an early age. His mother was a widow. There was no social help programs when he was there, and they lived in poverty. He was the only son, and they scraped money together. And the boy one day got home from all the jobs he was doing, and the poor mother trying to make a living, and they were poor. And so he came home one day and he was discouraged. And he said, I don't have any hope. I don't have any future. We don't have any money. I can't do anything. I'm useless. And there's no opportunities for someone like me. I just feel like giving up. They're just ridiculous. This is horrible. We don't have any connections. We don't have any money. This is just useless. He was frustrated. And the mother was cooking a big bowl of soup, a big pot of soup. And she grabbed the label and she pointed it and said, "Harry," and the label was soup dripping on the floor, you see. "Harry," she said, "don't you talk like that. You know that I told you years ago that you've got God. And with God, nothing is impossible. You've got to get out there and make it happen. And God is with you. You don't give up. If you choose to give up, you'll stay a nobody like you are now for the rest of your life. But you can choose, with God's help, to get out there and become something. So get out there and become something." And then she said, what you need is God and gumption. Gumption's an old English word which sort of means guts. Something like that. You need God and gumption. And so he went on and became the governor. And years later, near the end of his life, Harry is speaking at these big civil meetings, very great speaker. And a young man comes up to him. And the young man says to, "Hey, Governor, I don't buy into all that thing you're talking about how people can choose. And God, I'm not into that. I want to become a communist." And Harry says, "You don't want to be a communist, young man. You're just frustrated. You're just discouraged. You need to know that God can do something." And then he tells him his own story, how he had nothing too at one point. And he said, "My mother pointed that ladle at me, and she said, what you need is God and gumption." "What do you want to be?" he says to the young man. The young man said, "I'd love to be a doctor, a surgeon, the best surgeon in New Jersey." And said, "Well, you need to choose to give your life to God. And you need to choose to do the right things. And if you do that and you work hard, God will help you. You need God and gumption." 6 years later, Harry gets a letter from this young man who says, I graduated today from Doctor's College. I am a surgeon. And it would never have happened had it not been for you. I owe everything of what I become to that one talk you gave me. Look at the power of influence that each and every one of us in this room has on people around us. Isn't that cool? I close with this. On my wall at home in my office, I have an office. There we go. Oh, okay. In my office, I have a piece of paper which I've had up for years, right in front of me like this, so I can't miss it. And I love this quote. I read it often. It's written by a lady called Paula Coelho. One day you will wake up and there won't be any more time to do the things you've always wanted. Do it now. I've written a book. I've taken trips. I've done all sorts of things because of this. Because we can always put off, but we can do it now. We can do it now. You're never too old. Never too old. There's got to be life before the grave. We've got to live.